Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cheaper Than Therapy. So, today we are talking to Erica. And Erica, you wrote in that it sounds like generally you really struggle with big emotions kind of overwhelming you, really taking you out of the present, having a really hard time kind of working through them, grounding back down into a sense of self. And you also said that you kind of outwardly focus, right? So you put all the focus, whether on a partner or a person outside of yourself when you're in those states of overwhelm, and you're really looking for like actionable ways to kind of help you work through that. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that. I feel like I have a tendency to really give myself over to my emotions to an extent where they can floor me in a big way. And that just becomes sort of my entire day or week. And it's really, really challenging, especially, there's times where you can step out of it and see it objectively. But it's difficult to get to that point. And often it's in retrospect and you're like, oh, well, I could have shown up better. But in the moment, I find it really difficult. And yeah, I mean, I've spoken to many people about this, and often looking at the root cause versus what we can actually do in the moment to work up that sort of tolerance for emotional discomfort, I suppose. And I think that's what I wanted to talk to you guys
Mm.
about.
I want to ask you if you would mind sharing maybe an example of something that might get you into that state, like a certain, with a certain person or a certain kind of argument, or if you're aware, I guess, more of like the trigger point of what kind of floods you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I could put it into two different contexts. I suppose the bigger one is often within um, romantic relationships and dealing with conversations which are pretty uncomfortable, and like dealing with the idea of being perceived as something that I don't necessarily
Mm,
agree with. And instead of then being able to sit in
mm,
an objective space of having this conversation, it can snowball me sort of backwards into a very subjective experience, and it doesn't allow for forward communication to move out of that sort of space. Similarly, I have it in work with a constructive
mm,
feedback and just this idea of, I think the
mm-hmm.
overriding feeling that comes with both of these, with work or within relationships, is I'm not good enough, I'm doing something wrong, I need to be doing something better, I've failed, and now they see me as something I'm not, which is untrue, but that's sort of the programming
Mm.
that it instills. Yeah.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about how a lot of us, many of us in my experience, have this kind of coupled belief, right? Where I've done something bad, air quotes, I've done something bad means I am bad, right? And so when somebody comes to us with feedback or criticism, what happens is that belief is so, and we say coupled for a reason. I mean, there's no separation between them, right? So the second somebody comes with a criticism or a feedback, the ego immediately goes into I am bad, which the ego refuses to kind of allow itself to be in that space. And so in order to defend against that, the defenses come up, right? And whether that's actual defense, like us defending, whether that's flooding and shutdown, whether that's the big emotions. There's lots of ways I think that we reach for defenses. But in my experience working with clients, and Danae, I'd love to hear what you think about this. A lot of times in similar situations that I've worked with clients on, and in myself personally, it's about unpacking those two beliefs and kind of separating them out slowly so that they're not coupled, so that it's not so instantaneous, but that there's a bit of a speed bump in between them so that your kind of conscious self can kind of get in there a little bit and intervene, if you will, before the reaction to I am bad, before the belief that I am bad kind of takes hold.
Yeah, Erica, it's funny as you were talking, I was thinking about how much what you're describing has come up in the last week a lot, certainly for clients and with myself. I think there's a lot right now that's sort of being reorganized in our nervous system and in our psyches, that this is just like the collective, like
Mm-hmm.
growing pain that we're all going through around really outsourcing our self-worth in
Mhm.
terms of how we're perceived by others. And there's these two quotes that have just like come up and been really useful for me over the last week that I've shared with a couple of people, and I want to share with you. And the first one is a quote by Gloria Steinem,
Mhm.
where she said, being misunderstood by people whose opinions you value is the most painful thing ever. Because it's just such a human thing to like, when I value this person and I like, if we don't care about who these people are or their opinions, then whatever, like I could care less what you think of me. But when it's people that we truly care about and we want to see us as a good person or feel like we bring value to their life, there is like pit in your stomach agony a lot of times that comes with feeling like I am misunderstood or I am not seen in the truth of who I am by this person. But the other quote that I really love to draw from and has been so supportive of me in my life is this Audre Lorde quote where she says, "Nothing I accept about myself can be used against me." And so it's
Mm.
sort of like
Say
what
that
I like
again.
to
Wait, hang on. Say that again.
it's nothing I accept about myself can be used against me.
Mm.
And it's sort of like what I like to describe as like the 8 Mile effect. And for any of you who've ever seen the movie 8 Mile with Eminem, there's this thing that he does. He's like a rap battler or whatever, right? Like so he gets in these like battles with other rappers, right? And basically what they do is they like clown each other and they like say all of the embarrassing things about one another and they sort of embusticate one another. And there's all of these things that he knows in the final battle of the movie that they're going to be able to clown him with. And so instead of like waiting with like his rebuttals to that, he says everything they could possibly say about him before the other guy even goes. And then he's like, now what? What do you got to say that I haven't already said? Right. And so it's like our work is to be in relationship with the thing that we are holding contempt with. So if I'm telling myself I'm too needy or I'm too sensitive, like how do I really get into a space of relationship with like one, why that's alive for me so often, and then how I can be in just like such radical acceptance of like, yeah, that's who I am. I'm just a little bit needy in relationships or however I talk to myself about it. Um, and maybe needy isn't the best example, but whatever the thing is, like, how do I get into the space of radical acceptance around my humanity
Mhm.
so that it's like the people that are meant to be in my world and in alignment with me and who I am becoming and where I'm headed, they're either going to be able to be in acceptance of those things or they may not be my people. And how
Mm.
do I allow myself to just a little bit like settle into that space of like, and I got to be in acceptance of that. Do you know what I mean?
And I would say, by the way, that example, that exercise you gave is actually part of the uncoupling of the belief, right? So that exercise actually leads into the uncoupling because if you started to do the work that you're saying, Danae, then what happens is the I am bad part of it starts to fall away because you're in acceptance of who I am. And so whatever this thing is that you're saying doesn't automatically lead to so then ipso facto I am bad, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even
Thoughts.
add like I am human
Yeah,
in a
right.
replacement for I am bad because those
Right.
are like human things, right?
We talked a lot. Thoughts?
Yeah. Um, I think ooh, I'm trying to consolidate my thoughts. I really like the quotes that you shared. I love the quotes that you share on Instagram. I save them all the time because they're such beautiful little snapshots and reminders in that way. And it's so powerful how such a short sentence can sort of hold that,
Thank you.
Um, and yeah, I think
Mm.
getting comfortable with the uncomfortable parts of ourselves is probably one of the most difficult things to do. And it's also almost like the other
Mhm.
topic that I considered talking to you guys about was emotional vulnerability, because I've been trying to figure out if I am emotionally vulnerable, and I've figured out that I think I might not be, which I think also is like it piggybacks off the issue that I've brought up today of just if you aren't able to show up authentically, then you're not even really giving
Mhm.
yourself a chance to get anywhere, you know. So if you are showing up authentic,
Mm.
yeah. So I find that really helpful and a good way to look at
Mhm.
it, and just like a radical self acceptance, which is really difficult. It's quite scary.
Well,
Mm.
yeah, and I think that tangibly, what does that look like for you in those moments of flooding, overwhelm, defense structures come into
Mm.
play? I know for me, I've done a lot of work with like creating a somatic toolkit, right? Because it's about keeping me in my body and not allowing myself to flood or to get into my head, which is when those big emotions starts to take over. And it's almost like it sweeps me into like the whirlpool, if you will. Part of that is because I've gotten completely flooded, right? Like that coupled belief has kind of sucked me into the whirlpool. And if I can stay in my body through whatever toolkit you kind of start to adopt, right, and test and see what works for you, then I won't get swept. I won't get swept away, right? And then I can start to actually work with the nervous system. Like, yes, there are these beliefs, and then there's the nervous system actual reaction to those beliefs, right? So if you can get in between that and you can start to regulate your nervous system a little bit, that is where you start to build that tolerance for those hard emotions, right? And so staying in your body, right? Like whatever that looks like, I've shared this a bunch of times, but one of the things I'll do is like when I start to feel that flooding and I start to feel that defense coming on, I'll like when I'm sitting in a chair, I'll like pinch the underside of my legs, or I'll like kind of like dig my nails kind of like into my arm, right? When I'm sitting there, as a way to kind of like feel into the sensation and like force me to stay in the feeling realm, right? The felt sense realm versus like, whew, I'm gone.
Mm.
Right. And so doing some practices around like being present and, what comes up when I'm being vulnerable, what comes up when I'm, and starting to really stay in the body, like what is happening in my body when these moments of hard are happening. You can start to work with it and expand the tolerance, I find, for the feelings.
Yeah. And, something I would maybe add is that I often experience so many of our codependent tendencies as being so similar to the cycles of addiction. I say
Hmm.
this so often, and that, like, what I witness in clients is very similar to addicts that are struggling
Hmm.
with sitting in the discomfort of withdrawal or whatever their drug of choice not being available to them. It can feel very similar
Hmm.
when we are sitting in relational discomfort,
Hmm.
whatever that looks like. And so, similarly to how we need to build a toolkit to be able to stay with ourselves through riding the waves of difficult emotions. Yes, absolutely. The somatic stuff that Vanessa's talking about. And I would say just adding other things that I do instead of giving myself this person as my release valve. So it becomes like, how do I like maybe enroll in a class that I like, not only am like stimulating my mind with something new, but I'm also connecting with other people that give me a little bit of a sense of community that is not putting like all of my energy, all of my eggs in this one relational basket. Because then what ends up happening is that person just becomes a place to put my thoughts. It's sort of like the
Hmm.
obsession is very much like the ritual and the obsession around like whatever the drug is. But if I'm sort of spreading that around and I'm doing other things to stimulate my mind in the same way that I might have if I'm like in the thought process around like that person, that addictive tendency, it starts to feel a little different. I can also like do things like, a yoga class. I can like meet with a therapist. Like I can be in nature is like a really big one, but like building a toolkit of like these are the things I do when I feel activated and I want to use this person as a release. Because when I build that like ability to stay with myself and ride the waves of emotions as they come to the
Hmm.
surface, then it's like, we build self-esteem by esteemable acts and like keeping the promises that we make to ourselves. And then we start to feel proud of myself. I start to feel a little bit more of that self-worth. And then I have the ability to speak to some of those things that you're talking about, right? Like I can be vulnerable and not feel like I am diminished based on that person's reaction. But if I haven't really done a lot of work to cultivate a relationship with myself, that can be really hard because my sense of self really does feel pretty contingent on what this other person thinks of me. So I need to give myself a little bit of an ability through those tools to be in relationship with myself. Um, that's completely separate from anyone else's experience of me.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Real relationship with yourself. Um, yeah, I really like I like how what you shared about having practices and outlets outside of the people, the situations that sort of can most bring the stuff up. Um, I suppose that just that starts to build the foundation. And then I'm also just curious about, in moments where you can't necessarily go, sorry, I need to go do my yoga practice. I need to have this conversation. Do you have tools for situations within that of going, okay, I really need to show up to this right now. It's not something I can come back to. How do I try and almost regulate in the moment in real time to continue these difficult conversations or to navigate a situation that
exactly what I was saying is for the in the moment situation, because both have to be done at the same time. You know what I mean?
saying,
Like
yeah.
we have to be doing the larger work, which is the work of building the sense of self at the same time as the tangible in the moment work. They actually go hand in hand. They're not separate in any way. So
Okay.
you have to be doing both, right? Simultaneously, because they're building different components of self, right? There's like sense of self, capital S, and then there's like emotional regulation, nervous system in the body, right? And they kind of need to go hand in hand. So I would say that when you're in those actual moments, it is figuring out ways that you can tolerate it slowly more and more, that you can stay in your body, that you can, pull yourself back and kind of watch the thoughts a little bit, and be able to have some kind of anchor that will keep you there and keep you present. And I shouldn't say or, actually, I will say and. Give yourself grace when you start doing this. Because the way that I talk about it, like I've been practicing this shit for 15 years. When you're first starting out, your ability to sit in the moment and have the hard conversation might only be a couple minutes, right? That's okay. The other kind of thing that you start to get better at is being verbal about, hey, I need to take like a 5-minute break. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm feeling really flooded. Can we come back to this conversation in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? And allowing yourself that ability, but you got to verbalize it, right? That's also a hard practice to kind of start to implement, is saying, I need to take what I need. Like you're actually saying what you need, and then you have to give it to yourself, right? And it will develop slowly. I mean, it's a slow build to build that resiliency, but it's going to take time. So I say that to say, like, give yourself grace, that you're not just going to automatically be like, I have these somatic tools and suddenly I can have hard conversations for 45 minutes, without flooding. It's like, no, I still flood. It doesn't work like that,
Yeah, and I think just building on what you're saying, B, I think something that you often speak to that I have found really helpful to share with clients is like that we have to give ourselves all the grace to do this imperfectly, because it is something that like in the beginning can feel overwhelming. And you talk a lot about like, write it down, say like, I'm going to bring a piece of paper into this conversation with me because I get flooded. And I feel like that's been such a helpful tool to share with people. But the other thing I remember a therapist gave me early on was like, you can kind of make something up if like saying I'm flooded and I'm overwhelmed feels even confronting, because sometimes in the beginning that feels
Make
like
up an
too much.
excuse.
It's like she gave me permission to be like, oh, you know what, mom, someone's at the door. Let me call you right back. Like literally, like if it feels like too much, make up an excuse. Like who cares? Like, and whatever, maybe don't lie if that's not in alignment with your values. But I'm just saying, like, you can say, oh, you know what? Something just came up. Let me come right back to this or whatever, in a way that feels safe for you, I guess is my point. Because to Vanessa's point, a lot of this, like when we are in the actual experience of overwhelm in our body, like the self-regulation required to say, I am flooded, I don't know how to do this. Like we do need sometimes tools to actually grasp onto to stay in our body first, because that can feel overwhelming.
Being able to also just verbalize your own limits is really difficult, because I think for me, it just brings up so much shame that I'm unable to do it. That I have to do that, that I'm, just there's a shame, which is I mean a common emotion that kind of slides through all of these, is this like underlying shame. And I often wonder if that's a foundational aspect of it that has to shift, that this is not something, it's just something
I often say that shame is a through line through everybody who struggles with codependency. It's like shame is like the thing. It's like the most prominent, I think, when you're in the throes of codependent behaviors, codependent thinking, it's shame. And so, I mean, I think the combination of what Danae and I are talking about actually helps with that, right? It is the humanizing, it is the normalizing, it is the grace, it is the self-acceptance. I mean, all of these tools help to minimize the feelings of shame. And again, I want to reiterate, like, it's going to be quick in the beginning. You're going to flood fast because this is what you've been doing for X amount of years, your whole life. And trying to keep your eye on the prize. Like, it's a slow process. Like, I'm going to get there. It's going to slowly build over time. And knowing that, number one, it's not going to happen overnight. But number two, everybody struggles with this in some capacity. I want to repeat that. There is no one I have ever met in my life that's just like, whatever, hard conversations. Let's be vulnerable. No big deal. Like, I just don't believe it's true. To certain extents, people are better at it than others. They might have a better poker face. But I say that kind of tongue in cheek to also, again, remind you to give yourself grace. You're not the only person that struggles with this. In the moment, you feel like you are, but you're not, guaranteed.
And it's a muscle that you build and it gets easier. And I will say, I can hold this in the belief that like I should be able to do this, or I can hold it in this is me like doing this work of learning to hold myself more compassionately, of building up my sense of self. This is what it looks like. Literally making my mantra, I get to be human. I get to be imperfect. I get to love myself through it. Like, we can actually change the way we feel about ourselves with the conversations that we have with ourselves in those challenging moments. But it requires work. It requires that we not stay in the space of, I should be able to do this. Say like, oof, you know what? This is my humanity. I am working on it. I am growing through this. I am trying to do something differently than I did in the past. And over time, it starts to feel a little bit different. We have like a little bit of a quicker first response when these moments come up.
Erica, will you do us a favor? And as you start to experiment, as you get out there in the real world, in the activation, will you keep us posted and let us know, kind of tell us progress, like let us know what's happening. Have you found that this tool works better for you? We'd love to know, but also maybe even share it with our audience.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to. I think it would be a good practice actually to keep something of a diary of it and observe the shifts and changes over time.
Yeah.
So thank you for that idea.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, keep us posted. Okay. And we'll make sure we update the world, the audience. Really quick though, before we jump off, so I'll have the editor kind of stop here. Do me a favor and keep Riverside, the actual system that we're on, keep it open for a while on your computer after we jump off. Your internet connection is a little bit choppy, so it'll have a little thing that says like, it's done, 100% uploaded. But until then, if you could keep it open on your computer, it just needs to upload, I think, a little bit on your end. Awesome.
Sure, we'll do. Sorry, it's a good old South African connection.
I mean, listen, the fact that we're even able to do this with you in South Africa is pretty amazing, right? We just need to give it a little time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sky.
That's pretty cool.
But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's been lovely to
you too. Sky, nice to meet you.
You too.
Cool. Have a lovely day.